So it's my privilege. I I first became familiar with Rabbi Alissa attending some online meetings, uh, pretty heavy meetings with hundreds and sometimes even thousands of other folks seeking to support one another, carrying the burden of genocide against enormous odds and in the face of fierce pushback. The Palestine Solidarity Movement has succeeded in transforming the landscape of American politics, and the movement has catapulted Palestine from being an untouchable topic, even in liberal political circles, to a central rallying cry in grassroots progressive organizing, one that is championed by some of the highest profile and beloved members of Congress. And in the fall and winter of 2023, with the attention of the world focused on Israel's unprecedented aggression against the people of Gaza, millions across the globe mobilized in solidarity with Palestinians and their struggle for liberation. Jewish progressives in the US played a highly visible role in denouncing Israel's actions and US complicity in them, leading mobilizations and disruptions from the US Capitol to Grand Central Station. Some of you may have seen some of those things on social media. Rabbi Alissa Wise, who is with us today, along with her colleague Rebecca Vilkomerson, they co-wrote the book Solidarity is the Political Version of Love: Lessons from Jewish Anti-Zionist Organizing. Their book focuses on the important role of anti-Zionist Jewish organizing within the broader Palestine Solidarity movement, reflecting on their decade of leadership of JVP and drawing lessons especially relevant to those organizing from a position of solidarity. And speaking of JVP, I know we have at least one person here who is a local leader of JVP, and that is Barb Parmet. But now we're going to hear, I am so grateful that you carved out the time, Rabbi, to join us and to help us. So take it away.
So I'm looking to see.
Hi, you all. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's lovely to be with you. I'm here in Philadelphia, or so-called Philadelphia, L'Nez Lenape land. It's in the afternoon already for me, so it's fun to be in a different time, in a different place. Thank you for this chance to be here. It's so hard to know like how to show up, how to be these days, just how to live in this time of crisis. And these gatherings are so grounding and help me refocus on connecting, connecting even across space, geography, and time. I feel like before I get in, I want to share a little bit with you about my life and my work, and also get in a little bit of a history of Christian Zionism, if we can. And then I'd love to open it up to questions and discussion and hear from you all. It feels important just to start with just a moment of silence together. Over 31,000 people have been killed in Gaza over the past almost 6 months, including over 12,000 children. There are reports of Palestinians breaking their Ramadan fast on grass because they can't find any other food. The buildings are destroyed. The medical infrastructure is gone. It's really hard to really put words to the crisis. It's really, they're living on hell on earth. So for those that are lost and those whose lives have been taken and those who are suffering, Let's just have a moment of silence and of sending our love to them. May this gathering today and bring more healing, more hope, more love, more readiness for ceasefire into the world. So I want to tell you a little bit about how Rabbis for Ceasefire, the organization that I founded in October, came to be. So I believe it was October 25th. So we're just a few weeks in, and I woke up and saw another round of unbearable news from Gaza. And as I prayed that morning with words, the Jewish prayers are by rote, it's the same words over and over every day. And I just allowed them to sound new to me in my ears, as if I were saying them for the first time, and was kind of overcome with the way that Jewish tradition has within it this yearning for life and for freedom and for peace. Right. And these are the words that my ancestors have repeated for generations and flow now through me. And in that moment, I felt really clear that rabbis needed to step into our responsibility to tend to the Jewish community's spiritual and moral well-being, right? But reminding Jews of our core values, of our sacred texts and our traditions that compel us to act with all that we can to save life. And for now, that means calling for a ceasefire. So I immediately texted a group of rabbis, and 48 hours later, we had 80 rabbis who had signed on to a statement for an immediate ceasefire. What we said at the time was ceasefire means no more bombing. Ceasefire means no ground war. Ceasefire means all Israeli hostages must be released now. Ceasefire means immediate engagement by the international community toward a just and lasting peace in Israel-Palestine. So from there, Rabbis for Ceasefire, an unprecedented coalition of rabbis and other Jewish clergy across denomination and political affiliation, was born. We are now 317 strong. And the most pressing question for us has been, what do we do? How do we take the Israeli government statements on their plans and intentions for Gaza seriously? We never could have imagined on October 25th that today we would be mourning 31,000 lives, or the mass destruction of Palestinian life and the denial of humanitarian aid that is leading to a human-made famine. It's nothing that we ever could have possibly imagined. So we've been shaken to our core and compelled to action. Judaism, like Christianity and Islam, all believe that people are made B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of the divine. Is this how we treat the divine? In Genesis, we read, Jacob woke from his sleep and said, "Surely God is in this place, and I did not know it." It happened for me like that too, kind of, not exactly. So here's what happened. In the summer of 2007, I was studying to become a rabbi, and I lived in the West Bank for 2 months. I was one day planting trees in a destroyed olive grove outside of Nablus. I was working with local Palestinian farmers and a group of activists from around the world, primarily, I remember, from Sweden. And none of the Swedish activists were Jewish. Most of them were anarchist college students on their first trip to the Middle East, and they were there to support Palestinian nonviolent resistance for a few days. So before we set out for the day, we exchanged information in case of arrest or injury and chose people to negotiate with the army. And we walked 4 miles out to the plot of land where the olive trees had been uprooted and now would be replanted. We got to know each other a bit. The Swedish internationals were intrigued that I was becoming a rabbi. And our long walk out to the grove, they questioned me about what I believed about God. It happens, I don't know if some of you can relate to this, when I'm with anarchists or activists who don't like or trust organized religion. There's almost like a skepticism, or at least a confusion about my religiosity, especially in that circumstance, as the nearest religious Jews were the ones who did the uprooting of the trees. I would often dodge the question about God in this kind of situation, but at that moment, I had an answer. Like patriarch Jacob, I suddenly woke up. I was on the lookout for Israeli military snipers and jeeps and being pressed to answer what I believed about God in a land full of claims on God. I scanned my history with this land, my family's connections to Jerusalem, my teen camping trips in the north of Israel, my dance club days in Tel Aviv in college. And I came to understand that for the first time, it was against all odds that I was standing there. I had planted trees not too far from Nablus before with the Jewish National Fund, before I knew that they participate in the erasure of Palestinian history. Yet there I was, a white American Jewish girl raised in a right-wing Zionist Jewish home, helping Palestinian farmers plant trees as an act of resistance in the occupied West Bank. It was in the response to this question asked of me in Nablus that day that I filled in the blank about God. God for me is the impulse to serve the other out of a sense of responsibility that stems from the source of redemption. God was in this place and I did not know. And then I did. And I never looked back. Over my decades of activism for Palestinian freedom, I'm grateful that I've had many occasions to speak to Christians like you and be part of building multi-faith community. I believe that our solidarity across faith is our best chance for a future worthy of the coming generations. Between 2011 and 2015, I spent a lot of time supporting Methodists, Presbyterians, UCCs, and other Christians as they sought to align their values and their investments through pushing their churches to divest from companies profiting from the Israeli occupation. During those years, I would often offer a teaching from the Holiness Code. In Leviticus 19:17, we read, "You shall not hate your fellow human being in your heart. Rebuke your fellow human being, but incur no guilt because of this person." You shall not hate your fellow human being in your heart. This is what is required for one to engage in this rebuke. In Leviticus, the word is rebuke, and it's this word tochecha. It's a little bit tricky to say, but this concept of tochecha, what I think of as sacred rebuke, right, is this idea that it must be, any critique and any sense of pushback, right, must be rooted in love and respect. I can think of no greater act of friendship than to risk defamation in order to remind one's friends of their own ideals when they themselves have forgotten them. Tochacha, sacred rebuke, is one of my most favorite Jewish concepts and values. And it's found in the Holiness Code, which is the section of the Hebrew Bible where it's focused on moral and ethical imperatives. Tochacha is about our obligation to tell someone that they have done or are currently straying and behaving wrongly, whether to us, to God, or to another. What's more, Tochacha requires us also to engage with those who are rebuking and assist them and support them in the repair of the wrong that we're calling out. Jews will not be free or safe until the oppression of Palestinians ends. Christian churches are acting as partners with Palestinians and Jews by joining calls for ceasefire, which include advocating for an end to aerial and ground assaults, free-flowing access to humanitarian aid, and prisoner exchange, including longer term, a diplomatic path to a future where Israelis and Palestinians enjoy safety, dignity, and freedom. One way for Christian communities to engage in the ceasefire movement, and more broadly, the movement for Palestinian rights, is by doing education and organizing around Christian Zionism with your own communities and families. Today, Christian Zionism is arguably the largest social movement in the US, and their influence animates US foreign policy. This was on full display, of course, during Trump's years, but this has been true for decades. Some date the beginning of the alliance between the Israeli government and the Christian Zionist movement to the 1970s, when the Moral Majority Movement, a right-wing Christian evangelical organization closely linked with the Republican Party, took shape. It's true that it certainly gained steam and prominence in the US throughout the 80s, and the center of their ideology is the Christian theology of dispensationalism, which, if you guys can correct me afterwards if I get this wrong, but sees history through a series of dispensations or eras, right, appointed by God. And the idea is that we are now in the end times, the last dispensation of the Christian book of Revelation. And so in order for the second coming of the Messiah to take place, Jews must populate historic Palestine. And as that idea goes, right, which I've learned from reading some of Pastor John Hagee's remarks, is that at that point, Jews would either need to convert in mass or burn. And there's actually nothing more anti-Semitic than that. This is the root for the Christian movement in solidarity with Israel. And it dates back actually way before the 1970s in the US. And in many ways is the reason the state of Israel exists in the first place. From what I understand, it begins in earnest in the mid-19th century as dispensationalism is growing as a dominant theology. In 1843, for example, there's a book that was published by a Scottish cleric named Alexander Keith. And his book was called The Land of Israel According to the Covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And in this book, he contains a very dangerous and deadly lie that some of you may have heard before, which is the quote, "A land without a people for a people without a land." Keith was an adherent to the belief that Jewish settlement in historic Palestine is a prerequisite for the second coming of Christ. But he also knew that what he was saying was a lie, that it was not a land without a people. He had traveled to Palestine in 1839, 4 years before publishing this book. And again, 5 years later, he went. What's interesting is that this lie of a land without a people began in Christian Zionist circles, and it took a while for Jewish Zionists to embrace that idea. In fact, in August of 1925 in Germany, a prestigious Jewish Zionist paper wrote, "We may be a people without a home, but alas, there is not a country without a people. Palestine has an existing population of 700,000. That simple idea, which was in a publication in 1925 in Germany, was never taught to me in the Jewish day schools and the Jewish summer camps and the Jewish communities that I grew up in. The land without a people myth was what was taught to me. To this day, this phrase is used to deny the Nakba, which is catastrophe in Arabic, which Palestinians referred to the Israel's establishment in 1948, where over 750,000 Palestinians fled or were forced to leave their homes. And most of those refugees now live in Gaza. Israel's premeditated plans of dispossession and violation of Palestinian lands, right, and freedom wielded during its founding have only intensified since, and in the past 6 months have been on full, heartbreaking, devastating display. So what was a theological idea circulating in Christian circles quickly turned into a matter of policy, as the white Christian men who led the powerful nations of the world at the time, particularly then the dominant United Kingdom, were parishioners at the churches of the Christian Zionist leaders and believers in that dispensationalist theology. Arguably the most famous and influential in forwarding Jewish settlement in historic Palestine was Lord Balfour, who himself was a Christian Zionist. He was behind the Balfour Declaration, which those of you who are familiar with the history of the establishment of the state, it was a statement issued by the British government in 1917 during the First World War, announcing its support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. So it was not something that Balfour came up with on his own out of nowhere, right? This was something that had an idea that kind of somebody has been chewing on for a while. And there was effort, historians claim that there was an effort over decades, and some claim centuries, dating back to the 16th century, of promoting the idea of Jewish settlement in Palestine within Christian communities. So post-World War I, and in the wake of the Balfour Declaration, popular support greatly increased for Zionism within Jewish communities worldwide. This idea was, of course, also exported to the US and continues to animate, if not dominate, US foreign policy to this day. The foundational dispensationalist theology of the 19th century and influential Christian Zionist voices endured today, augmented by a post-Nazi Holocaust version that elevates Israel as an exceptional power that Christians must support as God's agent. So then the question becomes, what can you all do as Christians who are standing in solidarity with Palestinians and with Jews? Tochecha, sacred rebuke. Tochecha is a useful framework here too for how you can reach out to your fellow Christians. Tochecha, sacred rebuke, is essential, even if, and perhaps because, it's difficult for some to hear. It is out of my love for my own family members and my community that I call for ceasefire and that I fight for the freedom of Palestinians. A 3rd century rabbi, Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina, taught us a love without reproof is no love. So a love without tochecha is no love. And his study partner responded, tochecha leads to peace. A peace where there has been no tochecha is no peace. Out of respect and love, highlight what is wrong, and together we can step towards peace. So a few concrete ideas, because I am an organizer at the end of the day. So I have some concrete ideas about what you all can be doing. First is about showing up to where Palestinians are organizing in your community. And it sounds like you all are already very hooked into social justice communities in Santa Barbara and beyond. Organize other Christians. And there's a group called Christians for a Free Palestine that's actually organizing tomorrow a day of action around Christian Zionism around the country. And I don't think there's an action in Santa Barbara, but there's one in LA and Pasadena. So I'll put that link after I'm done talking into the chat. You can call and visit your elected representatives and talk to them about how your Christianity and your faith lead you to support and call for ceasefire. You could take part in multi-faith organizing efforts, linking arms with Jews and Christians and Hindus and Buddhists and all others. This coming Thursday, Rabbis for Ceasefire is organizing break fasts as Ramadan, Lenten season, and the Jewish fast day of Ta'anit Esther all take place on Thursday. So across the country, we're encouraging people to organize break fast meals on Thursday night in a multi-faith setting. And I'll put a link to that too, if you want to get hooked into those efforts. And then there's also the personal work to do, right? There's fear or guilt or confusion and that come into what stops us or distracts us from taking action. And this kind of community that you all have here is a really important space where you can kind of tend to those feelings and get support in them in order to be able to move in the world as a better ally and friend. This is the same advice that I give to Jewish communities, right? And in Jewish communities, the need for sacred rebuke is overwhelming. It's hard for me to put into words the betrayal and devastation at the moral hollowness and complicity of so many Jewish institutions with this ongoing horror in Gaza. What have long been fissures in the Jewish community are now becoming full-blown ruptures. And I believe we must not just allow, but encourage the rupture to happen. For too long, Jews have been bullied into silence through red lines, repercussions on jobs, friends, and family. We cannot allow ourselves to pay the cost of our ethical integrity for communal cohesion. At Rabbis for Ceasefire, we understand that our work is two paths at once, leveraging our moral power to call for ceasefire and safeguarding the moral center of Judaism for future generations. While many may not be ready to hear us, we must continue to speak. Our obligation to tochacha, to sacred rebuke, endures, and we need to do it together. This work is where God resides. God is surely in this place, and now I do know it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alissa. Appreciate you so much. We've well, some of us have heard of your work with the Jewish Voice for Peace, and just so much rejuvenation comes from being in those spaces, the weekly webinars, and just the organizing. As Reverend David said before about Barb Parmet's organizing here locally in Santa Barbara. So just, yeah, really appreciate just the breath of fresh air that Jewish Voice for Peace has had in this time of organizing. So there's a Jewish word that I'm curious and how this could play in, the old idea of teshuva. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. Is that something I often use that phrase or can see that context in like a restorative lens, but in an idea now, is it leading us into a new time, or is it more of a time where we're still in a fight, I guess? So that'd be a question that I have. I was curious about the relation. The reason I thought of that was the word, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, tehuha. Is that, if I'm pronouncing it right?
Wait, you're talking about teshuva?
Yeah, I'm talking about teshuva, but what made me think of it was the word that you
Oh, tochacha. Yes.
tochacha.
Yeah,
The word that you introduced us to. It
yeah.
sounds pretty similar, so I was wondering if there's any correlation.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, I see another hand. Should we take a couple questions and then I can respond, or do you want me to respond?
Yeah, let's do a couple. Let's do one more. Is there a hand being somebody that has
I
a
see
question?
David. Yeah.
Yes, hi. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your work. And I just want to say that my daughter's has two roommates who are both Jews, who are active in the right for Palestinians and for peace in Gaza. And one of them was disowned by her family for it. So it's a horrible and tough situation. My question for you, I've read the Bible several times, and as I understand it, God threatened the Jewish people with taking Israel, the land flowing with milk and honey, taking it away from them if they turned their backs on him, which they did repeatedly. So it seems to me, because of that, if you believe in the Bible, you believe that the Jews should not be in Israel. Am I misreading the Bible? What is your answer to that?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll respond first to the question around the connection between teshuva and tochacha. So teshuva is a concept that you'll often hear Jews talking about during the high holidays, so on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And the idea of teshuva is this idea of return, right? And that the Jewish year is a cycle, right? That it's the same, we read the same things and practice the same things like in a cycle. And that when you're doing in the season of teshuva and this season of return is a time where you try to make things right. with God and with others in your life. And I think you're right that there's a connection between that and the concept of tochacha, which I introduced in the remarks that I just gave, which is this idea of sacred rebuke. And I think the difference is that what tochacha is actually, the sacred rebuke is actually trying to invite someone into a process of teshuva, of return, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how they relate, right? It's like the
Gotcha.
tochacha is like you're like externally on the
Uh-huh.
outside, inviting somebody into that teshuva process. And I feel like it's actually really important that one of the things about tochacha is that you can't give it unless you're willing to stay with the person in their process as they go through that teshuva process.
Oh, wow.
Accompany them. And that if you're not invested, then you need, and that's not tochacha, right? That's just talking out of turn, right? And I think that's actually really important. And as and actually really significant. And I think the thing that I would invite everyone to think about is that this is long-term work, right? And that you have to be ready, right? In that spirit of tochacha to bring the critique and also stay in it over the long term as the healing happens, as the teshuva, as the return, as the repentance happens. And my hope and trust is that the interfaith communities that we're building are long-term and will be partners with each other in that longer-term process of healing. As for the other question, I think that a thing that I think the primary reaction is that, and I want to emphasize, is that
Is there anybody else with me? No.
it's important that we understand that the state of Israel and Zionism as a political project are separate from Judaism as a religion and the biblical text, right? And so what we're seeing play out is not a centuries old religious conflict. What we're seeing play out is a pretty contemporary political conflict. Right? So Zionism began in the late 19th century. As I was discussing in my remarks, like the Christian Zionists, but then the Jewish Zionists began around that same, a little bit later in the mid to late 19th century. And Judaism is a religious tradition that goes back thousands of years. And while, of course, there's a tether to the land of Israel through our sacred text, it's really important to me that we don't treat the Bible as a real estate contract with the Jews, because that's not a valid way to think about it, right? And B, it is important that we understand this not as a religious conflict, right? And that it's a political one. And I think that could get very complicated and confusing, but it's really important to clarify that. So I guess my response to your question is that, and that I want to look, the way that I think about the Torah is that this is a expression of how our ancestors understood the world and the divine. And our work now is to take inspiration from it, but not use it as a literal kind of supplant it literally onto our contemporary political map. Reverend Dr. David, I see you have your hand.
Yes, thank you again for being here. You mentioned something when you were talking, the convergence of three holidays, with Ramadan, Lent, and I didn't recognize the name, but it has to do with Hadassah, Esther. Can you?
It's a fast of Esther. Yeah.
Yeah. I know there's a connection there. Can you help us contemporize that?
Yeah. So I just put the link into the chat of the Rabbis for Ceasefire, the link to our the event, the iftars that we're doing. So the next weekend, Jews celebrate a holiday called Purim, which is based on the Book of Esther. I don't know if you all are familiar with the Book of Esther, but it's actually a really complicated holiday and story. And traditionally, in the way that the story goes, very quickly, is that their king in the town of Shushan in Persia, it ends up without a wife. That we don't have to get into the details, but Vashti, his wife, refuses to dance for him and his men, and so is banished. And then a new queen comes, and her name is Esther, and she's Jewish, but the king doesn't know that yet. And one of his ministers, named Haman, has a plan to kill all the Jews. And so Esther summons her courage by fasting for 3 days before interceding to protect the Jews. So there's a tradition before the holiday that you fast in commemoration of Esther's fast. And then for so Esther's successful. They don't kill the Jews, but what does happen is Haman, the minister who was planning it, gets hanged, and Jews are authorized to violence. And kind of infamously in chapter 9 of the book of Esther, Jews enact horrible violence, right? And it's a very complicated holiday because we're encouraged to kind of see the world turned upside down and, have parties and festivities. You dress in costumes and you drink until you're supposed to drink until you don't know the difference between good and evil. And it's actually really, over the years, Purim has been linked to Jewish violence. So in 1993, an Israeli extremist, Jewish religious extremist, entered the mosque and the Tomb of the Patriarchs in Hebron and killed 29 Muslims at prayer because of his reading of this holiday. And he was a follower of right-wing extremists who now hold office in the highest levels of the Israeli government. So this year in particular, the holiday is coming at a really difficult time. And so it's always been tainted by this violence. And then all the more so now, we're in the midst of this genocide. What does it mean to have a party and have revelry? And is that something that is ethically and spiritually okay? So some have, if you look on the Rabbis for Ceasefire website, you can find this place called the Shalom Center, wrote 10 new original chapter 9, that kind of center peace and nonviolence and dignity of all people instead of the genocide that's in the current text. And then we're also focusing on this fast day. So on Thursday, the fast of Esther coincides with Ramadan and Lenten season. And so we're trying to use that moment of the Venn diagram of our faith traditions, having these times of fasting and intention, and to do that together.
Great. I love that action item that just speaks to our moment right now. I also heard you say earlier that calls to action are to call your representatives, share your faith with them, and how it informs this call for ceasefire and doing multi-faith organizing, just meeting with different congregations in our community so we can have a collective power aspect. What are other ways? I'm thinking particularly, I particularly have Jewish friends that this is a tension that just kind of goes silenced or swept under the rug, and a lot of folks don't know how to talk with people about a sensitive issue. It's kind of even just bringing up Palestine. It's like if you bring it up, you're now seen as an activist, and so you better be prepared. So what are maybe some talking points that we can, not talking points to go in battle with one another, but what are some productive ways to have sensitive conversations around Gaza, Palestine?
Right. So I'm actually putting in the chat right now, Jewish Voice for Peace has put out a guide. This is a little bit old, but these things are perennial. This is from 2016, but I don't think a lot of the basics really change. Right. I think that what's important is, in this spirit, I think this tochacha framework is what I would say, is that that you do it in this, both in the idea that you're in the relationship, right? And like, it's about relationship and it's about values, right? And that your values, right? It's not that you need to be an expert in Middle East history or geopolitics in order to have a clear set of values that you guide your life by and applying them to the situation that you see in front of you, right? And it's really like that. I feel like it's a kind of as basic as that. And so I think leading with values and explaining, and sharing from that place, but also I think not having an expectation that in that moment anything is gonna it's like not likely it's gonna shift on a dime, right? And facts and figures often aren't the right thing, right? Because if
Yep.
you have a frame of the way you see the world and you have facts, then you just are like, whatever, that fact doesn't make sense because I see the world this way. So I think being able to share it at the values level, right? And there's things that are right and that are wrong, and you don't need to have written a dissertation on the topic in order to speak on it, right? Because it's really about life. Like, these are basic core human values of like human rights, the right to life, the right to access to food, the right to safety from bombs and violence, right? It's like these are basic rights and values. And again, that's why speaking from your own rooted place of your faith tradition, right? And being able to say like, this is how I make every decision in my life and figure out how to move in the world. And so I apply it to this situation, and here's where it takes me.
Gotcha.
Can
Great.
I
Anybody
say
else?
something?
Yeah.
Can I say something
Claudia's
to me,
hand is up.
Rosie?
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Claudia's hand has been up for a bit here.
Go ahead, Cody.
And then we'll go to Rosie before we stop. Yeah. You're muted though.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Weiss, Rabbi, sorry, Rabbi Weiss. I thank you for being here, and I really want to honor the fact that you, when you began, you stated the lands, the ancient lands that you connected from. So I want to honor that in a really good way as a humble follower of Native traditions, my own ancestors being Mayan. And so I have, again, I resonate with a lot of what you say, because in my Mayan tradition, there's definitely a clear belief in even our creation story that the divinity of the source, humans, animals, plant life, and all that surrounds us, right? And so as humans, we have that responsibility to have such deep reverence for each other and everything that surrounds us. And so I wanted to say that in a really good way. And I also want to say I agree with a lot of what you said. And the one piece that I'm like struggling with is, and I wrote it down, is the tohaha, the inviting to a process, and you can't give it unless you're willing to stay, the commitment to stay. And for me, as someone who strives to like walk the talk and not just foam at the mouth, as a person and woman of color, I'm having a hard time with that, because some of the people that I'm engaging with are like white clergy, people more of certain echelons that I don't have the privilege of knowing what that's about. And so, and I actually had a conversation this week with someone. I said, I can't do your work for you. I'm exhausted. I'm drained of being an ally myself as a woman of color to the Palestinian people. So I can't tell you what to do. And even if I thought of it, that's already investment in my brain power, And so I don't like, I'm still struggling with that, because want to be in a really good way. And so I don't want to be conflicted in the way of what you just said, like about, I don't want to invest that energy. I want to invest it in moments like this, where we're actually having the dialogue and working through it, as opposed to, oh my God, I got to go back to step one. Like, and not to say that I know it all, but it's just, I don't have that bandwidth, and I need to preserve it in order to not pour from an empty cup. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I just want to thank you for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate that reflection. I hear you.
Rosie, do you want to share your point?
Yeah, I just want to say something really, really quick. I thank you so much, for being here with us, and, for sharing all that you have. And I too, was pretty much in agreement with a lot of what you said. but I'm mad. I'm mad because, you know, I know a lot of Jewish people also, and a very sensitive topic. And, I'm forthright. I'm bold, I feel. Um, and I speak what I think um, in reference to situations that are taking place. And it pisses me off, that it seems to be so sensitive. Oh, it's so now I'm being facetious. It's so sensitive now, to my Jewish brothers and sisters, and what the fuck to everybody else. I'm a woman of color. My family also is, indigeno, Purapeche, uh, uh, Mexican American, and it upsets me, and I feel like, and it that needs to be spoken as well. It can't just be like, oh well, whatever is said, oh my gosh, now Rosie is anti-Zionist. I call that bullshit, you
Mhm.
know and that people are not allowed to speak. What about my people? What about my brothers and sisters of color, not just here but fucking everywhere, all over the globe? And oh no, we just have to accept and continue to live in, like, well, just be patient, you know uh allow for the change to come, because a change is gonna come. And but we just don't know when, and we got to be patient. I'm done with that shit. I'm like, I need to speak out when I need to speak out. When I see wrong, I'm gonna call it. And so
Well,
there's a lot of wrong, and I just wanted to make that point, in my opinion.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rosie.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, I totally agree. And I think that it's like part of the issue is that in the culture that we're in now in the US, especially in academic, I don't know if any of you are academics or work in university settings, but that's where it's really the most intense, where what's privileged is Jewish feelings over accountability for injustices and for genocide and for lack of human rights, right? And so it's really a problem. So my words were not intended to in any way say that we should at all be silencing ourselves. It's the opposite. It's really
Mm.
was trying to provide a spiritual framework for sharing that the organizing we do can be thought of as tochacha. It's sacred rebuke. Our calls for ceasefire are sacred rebuke. It doesn't need to be a one-on-one conversation, right? It's a collective experience.
Yeah, we've definitely had a tough experience here at our local big university, so it's yeah, been a very yeah, it's yeah, we a very tense atmosphere there. So we hear that. We're getting close to our time. Does anybody have one last maybe short note that they'd like to add?
Yeah, I just like to say, I just try to remember the verse that we are all perplexed on every side. And it's just sometimes that I think sometimes the people of color can really kind of feel like, our issues are pushed to the side. But um I try to remember that we all are fighting the good fight. And I try to remember that and not get discouraged. So I wanted to say that to everyone. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Cleveland. Thank you.
Yeah.
Amen. That's a good point to end on.
Yeah.
We're all just fighting the good fight. So
Right.
Rabbi Alissa, would you like to close us with any thoughts? We'll be going to doing our kind of ceremonial close, but just did you have anything that you'd like to conclude with?
Just appreciation for this community. I mean, I feel like this is the balm I need. It's just to be
Yes.
reminded that there's community of like-minded people everywhere, and we're all, as perplexed as we are, we're also doing all we can in the ways that we can. And I appreciate you all for inviting me and being exactly who you are. May you be blessed in all that you are.
Amen.
Thank you. We're gonna move to our ceremonial communion time. So
Thank you, Matt, for facilitating our conversation. Alissa asked if we, were in an academic community. And as Matt just mentioned that the Multicultural Center at UCSB was closed a couple of weeks ago because they were hosting actually a friend of our church, Linda Kikiewicz, who was going to talk on the theme From Chiapas to Palestine. And it turned into a big thing, brouhaha. That's not a word I use, but anyway, it turned into a thing. And so whatever is happening right now in what is called the Middle East is happening almost everywhere. So everybody, can we take a moment to say, let's see, to say that we'll get a different view here. If you would, everybody say thank you to our guest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
much, Rabbi.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, good stuff.
This is such a gift. You've been such a gift, Alissa, and we're going to close. Roy is going to conclude our time.
I've been thinking a lot since I saw my name in the list for leading communion today, knowing that our speaker is a rabbi. And wanting this observance to be something that Alissa could feel comfortable participating in if she wanted to. And so I've been thinking about it a lot since Thursday and what happens in communion, what it means. Of course, there are some Christian traditions that see in the communion a sacrament, an act that in itself is salvific, that in itself imparts grace. And some of us here as part of this community would experience it in that way. There are other Christian traditions that talk about it as being an ordinance, something that we're commanded to do that's not salvific, but instead plays a different kind of role. And that's the tradition that I come from. And that, so when we take communion, it's not that there's something, and I'm using this word very carefully, and please don't take offense if you're a person who believes that it is a sacrament, but it's not magical. But instead, it is an act that is deeply symbolic and which we partake in as a way, as I said last week in leading communion, of remembering first who we are, and then secondly, remembering who Jesus is. Or maybe that's backwards. Maybe we remember who Jesus is first, and then remember who we are. And as I thought about that, I thought, well, I maybe Rabbi Alissa could comfortably participate in that if she wanted to, that she could look back and remember the best things that we know and believe about Jesus, and then to embrace that memory, which she obviously does, of who she is as a Jewish woman, as a rabbi, as a leader in the community, and all that tradition holds and calls her to do and to be. And that's what I hope, as we partake bread and cup, that we do, as those of us here who call ourselves Christian, that we first remember who Jesus is, and then secondly, who Jesus calls us to be and what Jesus calls us to do. So on the night when Jesus was betrayed, he took the bread and he broke it, and he said, "This bread is my body, broken for you. Take it and eat it, that I might be remembered." After supper, he took the cup and he said, "This cup is the cup of the new covenant in my blood, the new understanding of relationship that we have with the Holy One. Take it and drink." Let's pray together. Holy One, we thank you for the reminder of who you have called us to be, of who we have committed to be. We thank you for forgiveness when we have fallen short, and oh my, have we fallen short. But we also thank you for the prod to be and to do better. We thank you for these words of wisdom and inspiration that our sister has shared with us this morning, and we pray that we will hold them deeply in our hearts and live them with our hands and our feet and our voices. Hear the prayers we speak and those prayers of yearning and commitment that we hold on our hearts, for we bring them all to you in the name of another Rabbi, Rabbi Jesus. Amen.
Thank you, Roy. And yeah, have a wonderful rest of your Sunday, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, everybody.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. It was wonderful. Blessings to all. Bendiciones.